Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, I explained that despite the great success of the Muslim rulers in conquering the Middle East and the southern Mediterranean and uniting those regions once again, their defeats in Europe reveal the limitations of Islamic efforts to replace the Roman Empire. And these victories provide the security for the Christians and the barbarian kingdoms to recover from the rise of Islam, the fall of the Roman Empire in the West, and provide their own alternative, in the same way that the Byzantine Empire will survive in the East. And together, these three civilizations and the way they interact will make up the history of the Middle Ages. We're now going to move on to take a more of a social and a cultural approach to Islamic history and Islamic efforts to replace the Roman Empire. We're going to examine what life was like for Christian and Jewish minorities under Umayyad rule. And then we're going to look at the Abbasid revolution and the cultural successes of the Abbasids, and in particular their establishment of a thriving intellectual culture. The Umayyads, led by Uthman and Muawiyah, had established a large empire, but it was ruled by a comparatively small religious and ethnic minority. It was ruled by Arab elites. The Arab population was a minority over this huge area of territory that you see colored in the map here. But remember that in Arabia in the time of Muhammad and Abu Bakr, Jews and Christians had been forced to leave the empire or convert. Now, following the conquests, the Islamic conquest in Persia and in Byzantine territories in the Middle East, this was simply not possible. There were too many Jews and Christians. But also remember that Islam isn't just a religion. It's not something that you either believe in and you go to church once a week, or you don't believe in and you don't go to church. It's also a social structure. It's also being part of the political and social community. So the question is, how do you live in it and at the same time you're outside it? That's the big question for Muslim rulers and for Christian and Jewish groups under their rule. In the main, we find that the Muslim conquerors collaborated with their local elites. You have a small Arab elite, a relatively small Arab elite that rules over everyone else, but they require the expertise of local Christian and Jewish administrators to maintain, let's say, the taxation system of and the infrastructure systems of the empire. So what we find is that most Byzantine and Persian officials keep their jobs, and simply who's ruling them at the top, that's the big change. Now, under the Quran, Christians and Jews were defined as dhimmi. That means people of the book. That means they share the same prophetic tradition as Islam. Jews accepted the Old Testament and Abraham. Christians accepted the Old Testament and Abraham, and the New Testament and Jesus. And so the Quran taught that these people were on the path towards fully accepting the fullness of revelation, which was accepting the Old Testament and Abraham, the New Testament and Jesus, and the Quran and Muhammad. And so the teaching of the Quran was that Christians and Jews should be protected, but they could not openly practice or promote their faith. They did, however, have to pay an extra tax, and this extra tax was called a jizya, so a poll tax, which means a flat tax on non-Muslims. So Christians and Jews had to pay an additional tax, and however many children you had in your household, that determined the amount of the jizya that you had to pay. Now, these taxes were certainly enough to persuade a number of inhabitants that they would rather be Muslims and pay less taxes than be Christians or Jews and pay more taxes. However, the extra revenue that was gained from these taxes was pretty crucial to the smooth financial running of this empire. So, although under Islamic rule, Christian and Jewish populations certainly didn't expand, conversion was not heavily encouraged. Because, of course, for the rulers of the empire, every time a Christian or a Jew converted to Islam, that was revenue lost. And so these rulers' priorities were not so much conversion as they were conquest. The more people you conquer, especially if they're not Muslims, the more tax revenue you gain. Now, as non-Arab Muslims start to convert to Islam, and they become known as Mawalis. So these are people, Mawalis are those who are not from Arabia but have now become Muslim. As more and more of them start to convert, the Muslim rulers, the Umayyad rulers, say, I'm sorry, but even though you've converted, you're still going to pay the jizya because we can't afford not to be collecting this tax. We need this tax to run the empire efficiently. And so whether or not you're taxed the jizya starts to become much more a question of, are you an Arab than are you a Muslim? And so this is divisions being drawn based now on ethnic lines rather than religious lines. This starts, as you might imagine, to lead to resentment among the Mawalis. Nothing about treating Muslims in the same way as Christians and Jews in the Quran. So they feel as though they're being discriminated against, and they start to lean towards dissidence against the Umayyads. And they start to lean towards Shia Islam as kind of the alternative, which of course, the political alternative that's out of power is always promising you everything that you're disappointed in from the politicians who are in power. In 750, the Umayyad dynasty in the city of Damascus, I'm putting my mouse over it here, is overthrown and replaced by a new dynasty called the Abbasid dynasty. Despite the Abbasid success in establishing a unified empire, and this unity that they'd established had a lot of the hallmarks of the Roman Empire. Standardized coinage, a standardized language of Arabic that had unified all these different regions across Africa and the Middle East. They were still seen as corrupt. They were still seen as living in luxury while taxing these new converts to Islam. And so both the Mawalis and the Shiites unite to drive out the Umayyads and replace them with this new dynasty, this new family called the Abbasids. And the Abbasids were related to Muhammad's uncle, and so they had a biological claim to be the leaders of the Islamic community that Shia Muslims respected. Remember, Shiite Muslims are those who believe religious authority in Islam should be connected to a biological link to the Prophet Muhammad. Shiites and Mawalis also supported the Abbasids based on the idea that the Abbasids would return the caliphate to a more austere religious practice of Islam. And the Abbasids quickly betray this dream. Instead, they establish a thoroughly opulent capital in the city of Baghdad. And the movement of the capital to the city of Baghdad that you see here in modern-day Iraq, right where my cursor is, this reflects another change in focus in the Islamic world. So remember, at first we had the movement from the city of Mecca to Medina, because Muhammad was driven out. Medina becomes the capital of this Islamic empire that reaches and that unifies all of Arabia. Then that empire expands into the Middle East, and the capital of this empire becomes Damascus. This is a Mediterranean empire ruled by the Umayyads. They're expanding both this way and this way and this way. Now, the capital of this new dynasty is Baghdad. So where is the focus of the Islamic world shifting? It's shifting to the east. It's shifting to the east, and for the next few centuries, the focus of the Islamic world is not so much going to be on the Mediterranean, on the former Roman Empire. Instead, it's going to be on the former Persian Empire, the territory that you see in orange here. And so this shift, the rise of the Abbasids, and the movement of their capital marks the geopolitical limitations to Islam's claim to replace the Roman Empire. And so the Islamic Empire isn't really going to replace the Roman Empire. Instead, it's going to be more of a replacement of the Persian Empire, but it's going to be a big Persian Empire. After the coup had ended, the Abbasids invited the Umayyads to a peacemaking dinner with them and then slaughtered them when they arrived, reset the tables, and enjoyed their meal. How satisfying. One Umayyad escaped. His name was Abd al-Rahman, and he escapes, travels undercover as far away from the Abbasids as he can. And so he travels to Spain. And once in Spain, he sets up his own separate Umayyad Emirate, his own separate Umayyad Caliphate, as you can see on the PowerPoint. And we're going to see this in North Africa as well. See how Morocco and Arabia are breaking away. This is a sign of how the focus of the Islamic Empire is shifting to the east. That Spain is so far away from Baghdad that the Abbasids they neither care nor do they want to exercise the resources in going after Abdul Rahman. And so this kind of shows you how the focus of the Islamic world has shifted by the mid-8th century.